I'm Rebecca Mitchell, 34 years old, sitting in courtroom 712 with my hands clenched so tight my knuckles turned white. Across from me, my father, smirking as his lawyer, demanded my entire fortune, $4.8 million, that I built from nothing. The judge looked at me over her glasses, asking why I should give everything to the man who abandoned me. I stood up slowly, looked my father straight in the eyes, and said 7 words that made the entire courtroom go silent. Before I dive into my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up to someone who tried to take what was rightfully yours. Trust me, what happens next in this courtroom will have you on the edge of your seat. I grew up in a small town outside Minneapolis, Minnesota, where everyone knew everyone else's business. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family: dad, mom, son, and daughter, living in a 2-story colonial with a white picket fence. My father, Richard Mitchell, worked as a financial advisor at the local bank, always dressed impeccably in tailored suits with not a hair out of place. He projected success and confidence, but behind closed doors, he ruled our home with an iron fist. My mother, Sarah, was beautiful, gentle, and perpetually walking on eggshells. She'd been a kindergarten teacher before marrying my father, but gave it up because he insisted a Mitchell wife didn't need to work. Dad controlled every aspect of our finances. Mom had to account for every penny she spent, keeping meticulous records in a little notebook she carried everywhere. If she couldn't explain a $2 discrepancy, there would be days of cold silence or explosive arguments. Then there was my brother James, 2 years older than me, and the golden child in my father's eyes. James could do no wrong. When he got a B on his report card, Dad would take him fishing to discuss strategies for improvement. When I got an A, I'd be grounded for not reaching my potential. From a young age, I showed an entrepreneurial spirit that my father seemed to resent. At 9, I started a neighborhood lemonade stand that became so popular I expanded to selling homemade cookies. By 12, I was the most sought-after babysitter in our neighborhood because I created activity kits for the kids I watched. When I proudly showed my father the money I'd earned, almost $200 over one summer, his response crushed me. "That's cute, Rebecca, but real business isn't about selling cookies," he said, holding out his hand. "Give it here. I'll put it in your college fund for safekeeping." I never saw that money again, or any of the money I earned throughout my teens. It all went into savings that I wasn't allowed to access. I discovered the truth when I was 15 and accidentally opened a bank statement addressed to my father. There was no college fund. Instead, there were massive withdrawals to casinos and online gambling sites. Mom knew. She'd always known, but felt powerless to stop him. "Your father has his demons," she whispered one night after he'd stormed out following an argument about money. "But he's still your father." When I was 16, my mother was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. The disease progressed rapidly, and within months, she was bedridden. I took care of her while Dad worked late, and James focused on his college applications. One night, as I adjusted her pillows, she took my hand. "Promise me something, Becca," she said, using the nickname only she was allowed to use. "Promise you'll become independent. Live your own life. Don't let anyone, not even family, control your future." She died 3 weeks later. At the funeral, my father played the role of grieving husband perfectly, accepting condolences with dignified nods. That night, he informed me I would need to take over the household duties since someone needs to keep things running. I was 16 years old, mourning my mother, and suddenly responsible for cooking, cleaning, and managing a household while maintaining straight A's because your grades are your ticket out of this town. I threw myself into school and work, picking up every odd job I could find. I cleaned houses on weekends, tutored middle schoolers in math, and even started a small business designing websites for local shops. Every dollar went into a secret account I opened with the help of my best friend's mom. I wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. My father would never touch this money. By senior year, I had saved almost $6,000, not nearly enough for college, but a start. I applied to every scholarship I could find and was thrilled when I received a partial scholarship to Northwestern University's business program. But I still needed more. When I asked my father about the college fund he'd supposedly been building with my earnings, his face darkened. "There is no college fund, Rebecca. Your brother's education took priority, he's pre-med. You can go to community college or take out loans like everyone else." That night, I cried until I had no tears left. Then I got up, washed my face, and made a plan. I would attend Northwestern, with or without his help. I would honor the promise I made to my mother. I would become independent, no matter what it took. When my acceptance packet from Northwestern arrived, I felt a mix of elation and terror. The partial scholarship would cover about 40% of my tuition, but I was still looking at thousands of dollars in expenses. I sat my father down at the kitchen table and showed him my financial plan, how I'd work part-time, apply for additional grants, and take minimal loans. All I needed was his signature as my guardian, and perhaps a small contribution to get started. "This is a waste of money," he said, pushing the papers away. "Your brother is at Johns Hopkins becoming a doctor. What are you going to do with a business degree? End up working for someone else anyway. You promised Mom there was money set aside for our education," I argued, trying to keep my voice steady. "Plans change," he replied coldly. "Your mother wasn't practical about these things." That night, I called my Aunt Lisa, my mother's sister who lived in Seattle. We hadn't spoken much since Mom's funeral because my father had cut off most of Mom's family. I explained my situation, and though she couldn't help financially, she offered me something invaluable, her signature as my guarantor for student loans. "Sarah would have moved heaven and earth to help you get to college," she said. "The least I can do is sign some papers." I left for Chicago 2 weeks after graduation. My father didn't drive me to the airport or help me pack. James was too busy with his medical internship to even call. I took 2 suitcases and my laptop, leaving behind the bedroom I'd grown up in without a backward glance. Northwestern was everything I'd hoped for, and more challenging than I'd imagined. To make ends meet, I worked 3 jobs. Morning shifts at a campus coffee shop, evening hours at the university library, and weekend work doing data entry for a local business. I slept 4 hours a night and lived on ramen and free coffee. But for the first time in my life, I was free. By my sophomore year, I developed an eye for vintage clothing at thrift stores. I started buying unique pieces, photographing them creatively, and selling them on an online marketplace. What began as a way to make extra cash quickly grew into a profitable side business. By junior year, Rebecca's retro revivals was generating enough income that I could drop one of my jobs. I was exhausted but proud. My grades were excellent despite my workload, and I was building connections with professors who recognized my drive. Everything was going according to plan until spring break of junior year, when I received a text from an unknown number. "It's your father. We need to talk. I'm in Chicago." My heart raced as I read those words. I hadn't spoken to him in nearly 3 years. Part of me wanted to ignore the message, but curiosity won out. We met at a diner near campus, and I was shocked by his appearance. He looked older, thinner, and was dressed in clothes that had seen better days. "You look good, Rebecca," he said, studying me across the table. "I hear you're doing well in school. Top of your class, from what James tells me." I was surprised James knew anything about my academic standing. We barely communicated except for occasional birthday texts. "What do you want, Dad?" I asked, cutting to the chase. His expression shifted from friendly to serious. "I've always believed in you, you know. Always knew you had that special something. I came to apologize for not being more supportive and to see if we could start fresh." For a moment, my heart softened. Wasn't this what I'd always wanted? My father's approval and acknowledgement? "I'm also in a bit of financial trouble," he continued. "The bank downsized, and I've been struggling. I hate to ask, but I heard about your little online business. James mentioned it's doing well. I just need a loan to get back on my feet. $5,000 should do it. Once I'm stable, I'll pay you back with interest." And there it was. Not reconciliation, but another attempt to take what I'd earned. Yet some small damaged part of me still craved his approval. Maybe if I helped him, he'd finally see me as valuable. Maybe he'd finally be proud. I transferred the money that afternoon, $5,000 that represented countless hours of work and sacrifice. He promised to pay me back within 6 months, with 5% interest. He even wrote it down on a napkin and signed it, as if that made it a binding contract. I never heard from him again. My texts went unanswered. When I called our old home number, it was disconnected. James, when I finally reached him, claimed he had no idea where Dad was living now. The money was gone, and so was my father. Again. I graduated with honors the following year. No one from my family attended the ceremony. But as I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I thought of my mother and the promise I'd made her. I was on my way to independence, despite everything. After graduation, I accepted a position at a digital marketing firm in downtown Chicago. The salary wasn't impressive, but the experience would be invaluable. By day, I analyzed marketing campaigns and learned the inner workings of the digital landscape. By night, I continued developing my own business ideas. My small apartment became command central for what would eventually become my company. I transformed my kitchen table into a desk covered with market research, competitor analyses, and wireframes for a mobile application I was developing. The concept had come to me during my work with small businesses through the marketing firm. Most small business owners struggled with digital marketing, but couldn't afford professional services. 6 months into my job, I met Abigail Warren, a venture capitalist who came to our firm as a client. During a presentation, I mentioned some ideas about streamlining digital marketing for small businesses, and she asked to speak with me privately afterward. "You're wasting your talents here," she said bluntly over coffee. "That idea you mentioned about creating automated marketing solutions for small businesses, it has potential. Have you considered developing it further?" With Abigail's mentorship, I refined my business plan and developed a prototype of my app, which I called Mitch Connect. The name was both a nod to my surname and a statement of purpose. I was reclaiming my identity while building something that would connect small businesses to customers. After a year of development, Abigail introduced me to potential investors. I quit my job and took the biggest risk of my life. The initial funding round raised $750,000, enough to hire a small team and launch a beta version of Mitch Connect. The app allowed small businesses to create professional marketing campaigns, schedule social media posts, and track customer engagement with minimal effort and at a fraction of the cost of hiring a marketing firm. Within 18 months, Mitch Connect had over 10,000 users. We expanded to a proper office in Chicago's tech corridor, and I hired 15 employees. Business publications began taking notice of the female-founded tech company that was revolutionizing small business marketing. When Tech Insider ran a profile calling me the Small Business Whisperer, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Saw your article. We should talk. I'm sick, Dad." 5 years had passed since our last encounter. 5 years of building my company, of 16-hour workdays and countless sacrifices. 5 years during which he hadn't once reached out to see how I was doing. But now that my name was in the press, now that Mitch Connect was valued at several $1,000,000, suddenly he was back in my life. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him. He suggested a high-end restaurant in Chicago, which immediately raised red flags if he was truly ill. Why choose an expensive venue? I arrived to find him looking healthy and well-dressed, sipping a glass of scotch that probably cost more than what most people spend on dinner. "Rebecca, there's my successful girl," he boomed, standing to embrace me. I kept my distance, offering only a handshake. "You said you were sick," I said, sitting across from him. "I am," he insisted, his expression suddenly somber. "Liver problems. The treatments are experimental and not covered by insurance. I need about $50,000. I studied his face, the face I'd once trusted implicitly as a child, then learned to read for signs of anger as a teenager. "You're not sick, are you?" His expression hardened. "Everyone gets sick eventually, Rebecca. I'm your father. Don't I deserve some help after all I did raising you?" "What exactly did you do, Dad? Take my childhood earnings? Refuse to help with college? Borrow money you never repaid?" My voice remained steady despite the anger rising in me. "So that's it? You've made it big, and now you're too good for your family? This is how you repay the man who put a roof over your head?" His voice rose, causing other diners to glance our way. "I owe you nothing," I said quietly, standing up. "Don't contact me again." As I walked away, he called after me. "You'll regret this, Rebecca. Family should stick together." I didn't look back. I returned to my office and threw myself into work. Within the next year, Mitch Connect expanded internationally, opening offices in London and Toronto. Our user base grew to over 100,000, and we launched an enterprise version for larger companies. I was featured in Forbes 30 under 30 list, and we secured another round of funding that valued the company at $22 million. I had built something substantial, something that helped thousands of small business owners realize their dreams, and I had done it entirely on my own, despite my father's predictions of failure. The scared 16-year-old girl, who had once hidden money in her sock drawer, had become a successful businesswoman who answered to no one but herself. I thought I was finally free of my past. I was wrong. 3 years passed without any contact from my father. Mitch Connect continued to thrive, expanding to over 300,000 users worldwide, with a company valuation approaching $50 million. We'd moved to larger offices in downtown Chicago, and I had a team of 90 talented people working alongside me. Business Insider ran a feature calling me Tech's Self-Made Success Story, detailing my journey from small-town Minnesota to leading a multi-million-dollar company. The morning after the article was published online, I received an email from my brother James. We hadn't spoken in nearly 2 years. Our last interaction had been a brief, awkward phone call on Christmas, where he'd mentioned finishing his medical residency. "Congratulations on your success," his email read. "I've been following your progress from afar. I know we haven't been close, and much of that is my fault. I'd like to change that, if you're willing. Maybe we could meet for coffee next time I'm in Chicago?" I stared at the screen, conflicted. James had never been overtly cruel like our father, but he had been complicit in his favoritism, accepting the preferential treatment without question. Still, he was my only sibling, my only connection to my mother. After several days of consideration, I replied with a cautious agreement to meet. 2 weeks later, we sat across from each other at a quiet cafe near my office. James looked older, more mature in his pressed shirt and wire-rimmed glasses. He'd completed his residency and was now working at a prestigious hospital in Boston. "You look great, Rebecca," he said, studying me with what seemed like genuine admiration. "What you've built is incredible. Mom would have been so proud." The mention of our mother caught me off guard. James rarely spoke of her, even when she was alive. "I owe you an apology," he continued before I could respond. "I was self-absorbed and blind to what was happening in our family. How Dad treated you, it wasn't right. I benefited from his favoritism without ever questioning it, and I'm deeply sorry." His apology seemed sincere. Over the next few months, we cautiously rebuilt our relationship through video calls and occasional visits when his work brought him to Chicago. James seemed genuinely interested in my company, asking thoughtful questions about our business model and growth strategy. For the first time since our mother died, I felt like I had family again, someone who understood where I came from but supported where I was going. 6 months into our renewed relationship, James mentioned he was considering a career change. "Medicine isn't what I thought it would be," he confessed during one of our calls. "The bureaucracy, the insurance, nightmares, it's exhausting. I've always been interested in business, watching what you've built. It's inspiring." I hesitated, wary of mixing family and business after my experiences with our father. But James was persistent, pointing out his organizational skills and connections in the healthcare sector, which Mitch Connect had yet to penetrate. Just let me observe for a while, he suggested. No official position, no salary. I just want to learn from you. Against my better judgment and the concerned advice of Abigail, who remained my trusted mentor, I agreed. James began sitting in on non-confidential meetings when he visited Chicago, and I introduced him to key team members and investors as my brother, making it clear he had no official role at the company. Strange incidents began occurring about 3 months after James started observing the business. First, a major investor who had been enthusiastic about our next funding round suddenly pulled out without explanation. Then, proprietary details about our upcoming product features appeared on a competitor's website. Most disturbing, rumors began circulating in the industry that Mitch Connect's growth metrics were inflated accusations that could seriously damage our reputation and valuation. I hired a cybersecurity firm to investigate potential data breaches. What they discovered chilled me to the bone. Someone had accessed sensitive company documents using credentials that traced back to a computer in my executive office during times when only James had been using it. I couldn't bring myself to believe it until our head of security showed me surveillance footage of James photographing documents after hours and forwarding emails to an external account. Even then, I wanted there to be some explanation, some misunderstanding. I confronted him in my office, showing him the evidence without preamble. I expected denial, excuses, maybe even remorse. Instead, James laughed. You always were too trusting, Rebecca. Did you really think I wanted to learn the business? I'm a doctor with 6 figures of student debt that Dad promised to help with promises he couldn't keep because he's broke. So this was about money? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. It's about what's fair, James said, his expression hardening. You're sitting on a gold mine while Dad and I struggle. He lost everything in the market crash. Did you know that? Of course not. You were too busy building your empire to care about family. What exactly were you trying to accomplish by sabotaging my company? I demanded. Dad said if I helped him, he'd make me partner in your company, James replied with a shrug. The plan was to gather enough dirt to force you to bring us in, or to damage your reputation enough that you'd need Dad's expertise to fix things. He has connections, you know. I stared at my brother, this stranger, wearing a familiar face, and felt nothing but pity. Get out, I said quietly. If you or Dad come near me or my company again, I'll press charges for corporate espionage. As security escorted him from the building, James called back. This isn't over, Rebecca. Dad has plans you can't even imagine. I spent the night in my office, methodically changing security protocols, revoking access credentials, and calling emergency meetings with my executive team and board members. Thanks to James's sabotage, we nearly lost a contract worth millions, but I managed to salvage it with a personal guarantee and fee reduction. That night, I finally accepted a painful truth. My family wasn't just dysfunctional, they were dangerous, and they weren't finished with me yet. The months following James's betrayal were a whirlwind of damage control. I personally called each investor to reassure them of our company's stability and transparency. We hired a public relations firm to counter the rumors about inflated metrics, providing audited financials that proved our growth was legitimate. I slept in my office more nights than I spent in my apartment, determined to protect what I'd built from my family's sabotage. During this chaos, I met Mark Thompson, a corporate attorney who specialized in intellectual property law. Our legal team had brought him in to help address the leaked proprietary information. Unlike the other lawyers who spoke in cautious hypotheticals, Mark was refreshingly direct. Your brother committed several federal crimes, he said during our first meeting. You have grounds for a restraining order at minimum, and criminal charges if you want to pursue them. He's still my brother, I replied, though the words felt hollow even to me. Mark studied me with intelligent blue eyes. Family complications are the worst kind. But sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to set clear boundaries. Over the following weeks, Mark became an invaluable advisor, helping me fortify Mitch Connect legally against further attacks. Our professional relationship gradually evolved into friendship and eventually something more. After a particularly late night reviewing contracts, he asked me to dinner. A real dinner, he clarified, not takeout at your desk. Dating while running a company under siege wasn't ideal, but Mark understood the pressures I faced. Unlike anyone else I dated, he respected my ambition without being intimidated by it. 6 months into our relationship, when a competitor tried to poach our development team, Mark stayed up all night, helping me draft retention agreements that ultimately kept our team intact. You should be charging me legal fees, I joked as the sun rose over Chicago's skyline. I'm investing in our future, he replied, kissing me softly before heading home to shower and change for his own workday. A year after James's betrayal, Mitch Connect had not only recovered but thrived. We launched our most significant upgrade yet, introduced a specialized platform for healthcare providers, ironically, the sector James had claimed he could help us penetrate, and expanded our international presence to include offices in Singapore and Berlin. I finally felt secure enough to focus on my personal life. Mark proposed on a rare weekend away in Michigan wine country, presenting a simple but elegant diamond ring and a promise to always be my partner in every sense of the word. We planned a small wedding for the following spring, just close friends and a few family members, Mark's side only, as I had none I wished to invite. 3 days before our wedding, my assistant Jasmine rushed into my office looking pale. "You need to see this," she said, sliding her tablet across my desk. It was a social media post from my father's account which I hadn't even known existed. The post included a photo of me from the Business Insider article alongside a vintage family photo from when I was about 10 years old. The caption read, "So proud of my daughter Rebecca Mitchell, whose success I supported from day one. Looking forward to celebrating her wedding and welcoming her new husband to the Mitchell family this weekend. Proud father family reunion." The post had thousands of shares and comments congratulating him on raising such a successful daughter. Dozens of business publications had already picked it up as a heartwarming story of family support. "How did he even know about the wedding?" I whispered, my hands shaking. Jasmine looked uncomfortable. "There's more. Your brother and father are currently giving an interview to Chicago Business Monthly about their instrumental role in the founding of Mitch Connect. They're saying it was a family business all along." Mark canceled all his appointments and was at my office within the hour. Together with our legal and PR teams, we drafted cease and desist letters and prepared statements refuting their claims. But the damage was spreading like wildfire. By evening, Mitchell family business was trending in business circles, with photos of my father and brother arriving in Chicago for the family wedding. That night, security at our venue called to report 2 men, claiming to be my father and brother attempting to access the space. They'd been turned away but had caused a scene, with my father loudly proclaiming he had a right to see the venue where his little girl would be married. Mark found me in our home office, staring blankly at social media posts about my inspirational family business story. "We can postpone the wedding," he offered gently, "or change venues, whatever you need." I shook my head. "They're not taking this from me too. We'll increase security and proceed as planned." Our wedding day arrived with clear skies and additional security personnel discreetly positioned throughout the venue. The ceremony was beautiful, intimate, and proceeded without interruption. During the reception, I finally began to relax, dancing with my new husband among friends who truly knew and supported me. Then the venue manager approached, her expression apologetic. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Mrs. Thompson, but there are 2 gentlemen causing a disturbance in the lobby. They're claiming to be your father and brother." Mark squeezed my hand. "I'll handle this." "No," I said firmly, "we'll handle it together." In the lobby, my father and James stood arguing with security. My father had aged since I'd last seen him, his hair now completely gray, but his eyes lit with the same calculating look I remembered from childhood. James stood slightly behind him, looking uncomfortable but committed to their plan. "There she is!" My father boomed when he spotted me. My successful daughter! Come give your old man a hug on your special day. Several guests had followed us into the lobby, and reporters who had been kept outside were now filming through the glass doors. It was exactly the scene my father had wanted, a public confrontation where I would either have to embrace him or look like a cold, ungrateful daughter rejecting her family. Mark stepped forward. Mr. Mitchell, you weren't invited to this private event. Please leave before we're forced to have you removed. My father's face hardened. Who do you think you are? I'm her father. I have every right to be at my daughter's wedding. I stepped up beside Mark. You forfeited that right years ago. Please leave peacefully. After everything I did for you? He snarled, dropping the affable facade. You owe your success to the Mitchell name, my name. I owe you nothing, I replied calmly. Security will escort you out now. As they were led away, my father called out to the watching guests and cameras. Ask her where she got her startup money. Ask her about the family investments she's hiding from her shareholders. There wouldn't be a Mitch Connect without Mitchell family funding. The damage was done. What should have been the happiest day of my life had been tarnished by his lies. But worse was yet to come. 3 months after our wedding, I established the Mitchell Foundation for Young Female Entrepreneurs, using $5 million of my personal funds to provide grants, mentorship, and resources to women starting their own businesses. The foundation was my way of honoring my mother's memory and helping other young women achieve the independence she had wanted for me. Within weeks of the foundation's launch, board members began receiving anonymous emails containing concerning information about Rebecca Mitchell's business practices. The emails included doctored financial documents suggesting I had misappropriated company funds, fake testimonials from former employees alleging toxic workplace behavior, and manufactured evidence that my father had indeed provided seed funding for Mitch Connect. The foundation board, composed of respected business leaders and philanthropists, requested an emergency meeting. Though most expressed skepticism about the allegations, they couldn't ignore them completely. Our largest funding partner threatened to withdraw their matching grant unless the situation was clarified satisfactorily. It took weeks of forensic accounting, character testimonials, and legal documentation to prove the allegations false. The foundation survived, but its launch had been overshadowed by scandal, and some potential partners remained wary. Throughout the ordeal, I knew exactly who was responsible, though I couldn't prove it definitively. They won't stop, I told Mark one night, as we reviewed the latest batch of damaging emails that had been sent to industry contacts. They want to destroy everything I've built. Mark took my hands in his. Then we'll need to be ready for whatever comes next. Because I have a feeling they're just getting started. He was right. What followed would test me more severely than anything that had come before. 6 months into our marriage, Mark and I discovered I was pregnant. The news filled us with joy, but also anxiety given the ongoing family situation. My doctor classified it as a high-risk pregnancy due to some early complications, recommending reduced stress and a lighter workload. I reluctantly stepped back from day-to-day operations at Mitch Connect, appointing my trusted COO Diane to handle most decisions while I focused on my health and our growing child. I should have known my father would see this as the perfect opportunity to strike again. The attack began subtly. Small discrepancies appeared in our quarterly financial reports, nothing major, just numbers that didn't quite add up. Our CFO, Benjamin, insisted he'd verified everything personally, yet the inconsistencies persisted. Then, anonymous tips began arriving at the IRS, suggesting Mitch Connect was engaging in tax evasion. The company was suddenly subjected to a comprehensive audit, requiring thousands of pages of documentation and countless hours of our financial team's time. This isn't random, Diane insisted during an emergency executive meeting. The timing is too convenient. I agreed, but we had no concrete evidence linking my father to the IRS audit until our IT security team discovered something alarming. Someone had accessed our financial systems using credentials belonging to an accountant who'd left the company months earlier. The unauthorized access had occurred from an IP address traced back to a small accounting firm in Minneapolis, a firm where my father's college roommate Thomas Blackwell was a senior partner. Further investigation revealed Blackwell had hired James as a healthcare consultant 6 months earlier, right around the time I'd announced my step back from daily operations. The pieces were falling into place, but the damage was already done. The IRS had found several concerning discrepancies that required explanation, and documents suggesting deliberate tax fraud had mysteriously appeared in our submissions. The stress took its toll. At 28 weeks pregnant, I woke in the middle of the night with severe abdominal pain. Mark rushed me to the hospital, where doctors diagnosed preeclampsia, a dangerous pregnancy complication requiring immediate intervention. Our daughter Lily was delivered by emergency C-section, 10 weeks premature, and weighing just 2 pounds, 11 ounces. I spent only 24 hours with her before she was transferred to a specialized NICU across town. Mark captured videos of her tiny form covered in wires and tubes, her translucent skin revealing the fragile network of veins beneath. I watched those videos from my hospital bed, too weak and ill to be transported to see her in person. While I recovered physically, the company I'd built faced its greatest crisis yet. The IRS investigation had expanded, with agents now interviewing employees and reviewing years of transactions. Media outlets caught wind of the situation, with headlines questioning whether Tech's self-made success story was actually built on fraud. My father made his move just as I was finally discharged from the hospital. A formal lawsuit was filed against me and Mitch Connect, claiming he had been the original investor and idea generator behind the company. According to his lawsuit, he had provided $250,000 in seed funding and contributed the core concept for the business, only to be cut out by his ungrateful daughter who stole his intellectual property. The allegations were completely fabricated, but the lawsuit contained just enough factual details about the company's early days to seem plausible to outsiders. My father had clearly been gathering information for years, possibly from James's time at the company and other sources. The media frenzy that followed was overwhelming. Business publications that had once celebrated my self-made success now questioned whether I'd been dishonest about my origins. Investors became nervous, and our stock price dropped by 15% in a single day. Even some board members began to waver, suggesting I might need to step aside temporarily for the good of the company until the legal issues were resolved. I was living a nightmare split between hospital visits to my fragile newborn daughter, whose condition remained critical, and desperate attempts to save my company from my father's most vicious attack yet. Mark was my rock through it all, handling legal strategies during the day and accompanying me to the NICU at night, where we read stories to Lily and sang lullabies through the openings in her incubator. During one particularly dark night, after receiving news that 3 major clients had put their contracts on hold pending resolution of the Mitchell family dispute, I broke down in the hospital parking lot. "I can't fight them anymore," I sobbed as Mark held me. "Maybe I should just settle, give them some money or company shares to make this go away. Lily needs me focused on her, not this endless battle." Mark wiped my tears gently. "That's exactly what they're counting on, that you'll be too exhausted and worried about Lily to fight back. But if you give in now, they'll never stop coming for more." "But what if we lose everything? The company, our savings, our reputation?" "We won't," he promised, "because unlike your father and brother, we have something they'll never have." "What's that?" I asked. "The truth," he said simply, "and people who believe in you enough to help uncover it." That night, as I watched our tiny daughter fighting for every breath, I made a decision. I would not let my father's lies become her inheritance. I would fight not just for myself or the company I'd built, but for Lily's future. She deserved to grow up seeing that truth and justice could prevail, that her mother wouldn't be bullied or blackmailed, even by family. The next morning, I called an emergency board meeting and announced I would be temporarily stepping back as CEO to focus on my daughter's health, but not before appointing a leadership team I trusted implicitly to fight the false allegations. Diane would serve as acting CEO. Benjamin would handle all financial matters related to the IRS audit, and Mark would coordinate our legal defense against my father's lawsuit. I built Mitch Connect from nothing, I told the board members, my voice steady despite my exhaustion. Every dollar, every idea, every success came through my own work and the brilliant team we've assembled. I will not allow lies to destroy what we've created together. As I left the boardroom, my assistant Jasmine caught up with me, her expression determined. "I've been with you since the beginning," she said. "Before the fancy offices and the investors. I remember you working from your apartment, eating ramen to save money. Your father wasn't there. Your brother wasn't there. I was. And I'm not letting them rewrite history." Her words gave me the first glimmer of hope I'd felt in weeks. Perhaps I wasn't as alone in this fight as I'd thought. While Lily fought her own battle in the NICU, gaining strength ounce by precious ounce, my team launched a counter-offensive against my father's attacks. Jasmine became the unofficial commander of what we called Operation Truth, coordinating efforts across departments to gather evidence refuting my father's claims. Her first breakthrough came while archiving old company emails. She discovered messages from the early days of Mitch Connect, where I'd discussed financial struggles and bootstrap methods with early team members, clear evidence contradicting my father's claim that he provided $250,000 in seed funding. In one email to our first developer, I'd written, "Can't afford to pay market rate yet, but can offer equity. Currently funding everything from my savings and a small personal loan." Mark assembled a legal team specializing in both corporate law and family disputes. Their strategy was two-pronged: vigorously defend against my father's lawsuit while preparing a potential countersuit for defamation and business interference. "We need to understand why he's doing this now," Mark reasoned during a strategy session at our home, where I was recovering and pumping breast milk to be delivered to Lily. "The timing can't be coincidental attacking when you're physically vulnerable and emotionally focused on Lily." The answer came from an unexpected source. My college roommate Tara, now a financial analyst, offered to research my father's current situation. What she found was illuminating. He'd accumulated massive gambling debts to some dangerous people. Public records showed multiple liens against his properties, and he'd recently been served with foreclosure notices. "He's desperate for money," Tara explained over the phone, "and from what I can gather, he doesn't have much time to get it." Armed with this knowledge, we expanded our investigation. Mark hired a private investigator who specialized in financial fraud, focusing on my father's past business dealings. The investigator uncovered a pattern of similar behavior. My father had attempted to claim partial ownership of businesses belonging to two former partners, using threatening lawsuits that he later settled for cash payouts. Meanwhile, Benjamin and the financial team methodically addressed each discrepancy flagged by the IRS, demonstrating how the errors had been deliberately planted in our systems. Our cybersecurity experts provided digital forensic evidence linking the unauthorized access to Thomas Blackwell's accounting firm, and from there to my brother James. Diane focused on stabilizing the company, personally calling key clients and investors to address their concerns. Her straightforward approach and deep knowledge of our operations helped retain most of our major contracts, though some remained on hold pending resolution of the legal issues. As evidence mounted in our favor, I received an unexpected package from my Aunt Lisa, my mother's sister, who had helped me secure student loans years ago. Inside was my mother's diary, which Lisa had kept after her death. "I found this while cleaning out my attic," Lisa's note read. "Sarah wanted you to have this when the time was right. I think that time is now." The diary contained detailed accounts of my father's financial abuse throughout their marriage, how he controlled every penny, belittled my mother's spending, and frequently took money she'd saved for household expenses. Several entries specifically mentioned his gambling addiction and the family funds he'd squandered. Most devastating were entries about his plans for his children. "Richard says James will inherit the business contacts, while Rebecca can marry well if she's pretty enough." When I suggested she might want a career of her own, he laughed. Tears streamed down my face as I read my mother's private thoughts, her fears for my future, her quiet attempts to nurture my independence despite my father's opposition, her regret at not being stronger in my defense. The final entries, written during her illness, revealed her greatest worry was leaving me under my father's complete control. The diary wasn't just emotionally significant, it was potentially valuable evidence showing my father's long-standing pattern of financial manipulation and his dismissal of my business capabilities. Mark believed it could help establish his character and motives if the case went to trial. Our team also tracked down my former employers from college, who provided statements confirming I had worked multiple jobs to support myself through school, contradicting my father's claim that he had financed my education and early career. Old roommates testified about my frugal lifestyle and constant work ethic. Even professors remembered my entrepreneurial projects and the fact that I never mentioned family financial support. As we built our case, the business community began rallying around me. Female founders I'd mentored through the years came forward with statements about my integrity and transparency. Industry leaders published op-eds questioning the suspicious timing of the allegations. The Women in Tech Association released a statement of support, noting the troubling pattern of successful women being accused of fraud or deception at the height of their careers. My father, apparently realizing his position was weakening, escalated his tactics. Witnesses reported being approached with bribes or threats to testify in his favor. Documents submitted to the court mysteriously disappeared or were altered after filing. When our legal team presented evidence of these tampering attempts, the judge issued a stern warning to my father's attorneys. Throughout this period, Lily remained my North Star. She grew stronger each day, eventually breathing without assistance and maintaining her body temperature independently. The neonatologists were cautiously optimistic about her prognosis, though she would likely need to remain in the hospital until close to her original due date. Mark and I established a routine, taking shifts at the hospital so Lily always had one of us with her. During my hours at her bedside, I often read aloud from business books, industry publications, or simply told her stories about the company I'd built and the challenges I'd overcome. "Your grandmother would have adored you," I whispered to her one night as she gripped my finger with her tiny hand. "She taught me to be strong even when it seemed impossible. And that's what I'm teaching you now." After 2 months of intense preparation, Mark and our legal team were confident in our defense against my father's lawsuit. But just as we were finalizing our strategy, Jasmine made a disturbing discovery. Key evidence proving the falsification of documents had gone missing from our secure server. "Someone with high-level access deleted the files," she reported grimly, "and the backups have been corrupted." This was a potential disaster. Without those files, we couldn't definitively prove that the fraudulent tax documents had been planted. The IRS investigation might conclude with penalties or worse, and my father's lawsuit would gain credibility. Mark, Jasmine, and our IT security team worked through the night, attempting to recover the deleted data. By morning, they had reached a grim conclusion. The files were gone, deliberately wiped using sophisticated methods. "We have one last option," Jasmine said, her eyes red from lack of sleep. I kept unofficial backups on an encrypted drive at my apartment. It's not standard protocol, but after what happened with James, I didn't trust our systems completely. It was unorthodox and potentially problematic from a chain of custody perspective, but it might be our only chance. Mark dispatched a security team to escort Jasmine home immediately. 3 hours later, she returned with the drive. The files were intact emails, server logs, and digital forensic analyses, all pointing to the deliberate planting of false evidence by individuals connected to my father. "We've got him," Mark said as he reviewed the recovered data. "This isn't just enough to defeat his lawsuit, it's enough to file criminal charges for fraud and perjury." For the first time in months, I allowed myself to believe we might actually win this fight. But I knew my father well enough to recognize he would be most dangerous when cornered. "He'll have one more move," I warned Mark. "Something dramatic, something public. Then we'll be ready," he promised, squeezing my hand. No more surprises. But neither of us could have predicted just how far my father would go in his final desperate gambit. The courthouse steps swarmed with reporters on the first day of trial. The Mitchell family business dispute, as the media had dubbed it, had captured public attention as a dramatic tale of family betrayal, business ethics, and the question of what we truly owe our parents. I arrived early with Mark and our legal team, determined to project confidence despite my exhaustion. Lily was still in the hospital, though she had been moved from the NICU to a transitional care unit and was now taking bottles and approaching 5 pounds miraculous progress that gave me strength on the most difficult days. My father and James arrived moments later, staging what appeared to be a carefully choreographed entrance. My father, leaning slightly on a cane he'd never needed before, waved solemnly to the cameras. James, dressed in scrubs as if he'd rushed straight from saving lives, supported him with a practiced look of filial concern. Their performance was flawless, the aging father and devoted son sadly forced to seek justice against an ungrateful daughter. Inside the courtroom, my father's attorney, Maxwell Bennett, opened with a compelling narrative. Richard Mitchell, a dedicated father who had nurtured his daughter's entrepreneurial spirit from childhood, providing financial support, business connections, and the very concept that would become Mitch Connect. According to Bennett, I had repaid this devotion with betrayal, cutting my father out of the business once it became successful and denying him credit for his contributions. Ladies and gentlemen, Bennett concluded dramatically, this case is not merely about business ownership or financial compensation. It is about acknowledging the truth of where great ideas come from, about honoring family bonds, and about simple fairness. Richard Mitchell is not asking for the entire company, just recognition of his rightful contribution and the compensation he deserves. Our attorney, Catherine Wilson, countered with a methodical presentation of facts. Bank records showing I'd financed the company entirely through personal savings and a small bank loan, early business plans written in my handwriting, testimonials from my college professors about the origins of the Mitch Connect concept in my undergraduate research, and statements from early employees confirming I was the sole founder. This case, Catherine stated, is about a simple but troubling pattern of behavior. Richard Mitchell abandoned his daughter financially during college, reappeared only when she had achieved success on her own, and is now attempting to claim credit and compensation for work he never performed and money he never invested. Over the next 3 days, my father presented his case. He took the stand himself, playing the role of the supportive father, perfectly describing how he'd encouraged my business interests as a child, supposedly setting aside money for my future ventures, and claiming he'd provided the initial $250,000 investment that launched Mitch Connect. I never wanted public credit, he said, his voice breaking with well-rehearsed emotion. I just wanted to see my daughter succeed. But when millions of dollars were at stake, she pretended I never contributed anything. What father wouldn't be heartbroken? James testified next, claiming he'd been present at family discussions, where my father and I had mapped out the business concept together. He described fictional family dinners where my father had supposedly outlined marketing strategies that I later claimed as my own. His performance was convincing, detailed, seemingly heartfelt, and utterly fabricated. Other witnesses included Thomas Blackwell, who testified to seeing my father invest substantial funds in my business, though he couldn't produce records. A former bank employee who claimed to remember my father discussing the investment, but who, our research revealed, had been fired for falsifying documents, and several business associates who provided vague statements about my father's involvement in my early career. When our turn came, Catherine methodically dismantled their case. She presented my college financial aid applications showing I had received no parental support, bank statements proving I'd worked multiple jobs to support myself, and testimony from my first employees confirming they'd often seen me skip meals to make payroll in the early days. My former college roommate described how I'd lived on ramen noodles and worked overnight shifts to save for business expenses. Early investors testified that I had approached them alone, with no mention of family backing. My first landlord recalled my struggling to pay rent on my tiny apartment that doubled as Mitch Connect's first office. Abigail Warren, my mentor, provided particularly powerful testimony. I've backed dozens of startups over the years. I know when someone has support and when they're building from nothing. Rebecca was self-made in every sense of the word. In our early meetings, she specifically told me she had no family backing and needed to make every dollar of investment count. Throughout our witnesses' testimony, I noticed my father becoming increasingly agitated, whispering urgently to his lawyer and passing notes to James. His carefully constructed persona of the dignified, wronged father was cracking under the weight of evidence against him. On the fourth day, I took the stand. Catherine guided me through my history, my mother's death, my father's refusal to support my education, my years of working multiple jobs while building my business. I testified about the $5,000 loan my father had never repaid, his absence throughout my company's growth, and his sudden reappearance once Mitch Connect was valued in the millions. During cross-examination, Maxwell Bennett attempted to portray me as the ungrateful daughter who had turned her back on family out of greed. "Isn't it true," he demanded, "that you've consistently tried to distance yourself from the Mitchell family name while building your fortune?" "I've tried to distance myself from financial and emotional abuse," I replied calmly. "My company name, Mitch Connect, actually embraces my family name while building something positive from it." Bennett switched tactics, producing a document that appeared to be an early business plan with my father's handwriting in the margins. "How do you explain these notes clearly showing your father's input into the fundamental business model?" Catherine objected immediately, as this document hadn't been provided during discovery. The judge ordered a recess to examine the unexpected evidence. In the hallway, Mark scrutinized photographs of the document on his tablet. "The paper is aged, but the ink isn't," he noted. "And these margin notes match samples of your father's current handwriting, not how he would have written years ago when this document was supposedly created." A forensic document examiner confirmed Mark's suspicions. The document was authentic, but the handwritten notes had been added recently, using artificially aged ink. The judge not only excluded the document, but warned Bennett about presenting potentially fraudulent evidence. When court resumed, my father appeared to be suffering from some sort of medical episode. He clutched his chest, breathing heavily as James called for a doctor. The judge immediately ordered a recess, and paramedics were called to the courtroom. I watched with mixed emotions as my father was carried out on a stretcher, James at his side playing the devoted son. Part of me felt genuine concern despite everything. He was still my father. But another part recognized the convenient timing of this emergency, just as his case was imploding. My suspicions were confirmed when Mark received a call from a hospital contact 2 hours later. My father had been examined and released almost immediately, with no evidence of cardiac issues. The medical emergency had been entirely theatrical. The next day, my father returned to court looking weak but determined, garnering sympathetic glances from some jurors. Bennett requested accommodation for his client's fragile health, and the judge allowed him to testify seated with breaks as needed. During this testimony, my father played his final card, an emotional appeal that left many in the courtroom moved. With tears streaming down his face, he described his pride in my accomplishments and his hurt at being excluded from my success. "All I ever wanted was to be part of my daughter's life," he said, his voice breaking. "To see her recognize that a father's love and support, emotional, if not always financial, helped shape the remarkable woman she's become. I don't want her money. I just want acknowledgement of our family bond." It was a masterful performance. I saw several jurors dabbing at their eyes, clearly affected by his apparent vulnerability. Even Catherine looked concerned about the emotional impact of his testimony. As court adjourned for the day, I felt a mounting sense of dread. My father's emotional appeal had resonated with the jury despite the substantial evidence in our favor. Facts might be on our side, but my father had always excelled at manipulating emotions. "He's going for sympathy now that his evidence has fallen apart," Mark observed as we left the courthouse. "And it might be working." That night, as I sat beside Lily's hospital crib, I faced a difficult decision. We had one more day of testimony before closing arguments. Our case was factually strong but potentially vulnerable to the emotional narrative my father had constructed. My phone buzzed with a text from Jasmine. Found something. Need to meet as soon as possible. An hour later, Mark and I sat in our living room as Jasmine played an audio recording. It was my father's voice, crystal clear, speaking to James in what sounded like a restaurant. "The sympathy angle is our best shot now," my father was saying. "If I can get the jury feeling sorry for me, they might overlook the financial discrepancies. Tomorrow, I'll really turn up the waterworks talk about how her mother would be heartbroken to see her treating family this way." James responded, "What if she brings up the gambling debts? Or the threats you made?" "She can't prove any of that," my father replied confidently. "And once we get a settlement, Vince will back off about the money I owe him. He's already agreed to take half if I pay by the end of the month." "Where did you get this?" Mark asked, his expression a mix of shock and triumph. "The restaurant where they met records all conversations as part of their security system," Jasmine explained. "The owner is my cousin." When I mentioned the case, he remembered seeing them there and checked the recordings. The recording was explosive, clear evidence that my father's emotional testimony was calculated deception and confirmation of the gambling debts that had motivated his lawsuit. But using it raised ethical and legal questions about privacy and admissibility. After consulting with Catherine, we decided to present the recording to the judge in chambers rather than springing it on my father in open court. The judge would determine its admissibility and whether it constituted legitimate impeachment evidence. The final day of trial began with arguments about the recording outside the jury's presence. The judge ultimately ruled it admissible for impeachment purposes, only meaning it could be used to challenge my father's testimony but not as direct evidence of his motives. When my father took the stand to complete his testimony, he had no idea what was coming. He doubled down on his emotional narrative, describing his supposed pride in nurturing my business acumen and his heartbreak at being erased from my success story. During cross-examination, Catherine approached calmly. "Mr. Mitchell, yesterday you testified that your lawsuit isn't about money, but about recognition of your contribution to your daughter's success. Is that correct?" "Yes," he replied, his expression solemn. "It's about family and acknowledgement. And you testified that you have no pressing financial concerns motivating this lawsuit, correct?" "That's right. My financial situation is comfortable." Catherine nodded to the court technician, who played the damning recording. As my father's own words filled the courtroom, discussing turning up the waterworks and settling gambling debts with lawsuit money, the color drained from his face. James, sitting behind the plaintiff's table, stared at the floor. When the recording ended, the courtroom was completely silent. My father looked as if he'd been physically struck, his carefully constructed persona shattered in 3 minutes of unguarded conversation. "Would you like to revise your testimony, Mr. Mitchell?" Catherine asked quietly. He had no answer. The judge called a brief recess, during which my father huddled urgently with his legal team. When court resumed, Bennett requested permission to approach the bench. After a whispered conference with the judge and Catherine, he announced that his client wished to withdraw his lawsuit. The judge addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, the plaintiff has chosen to withdraw all claims against the defendant. Your service is no longer required, though I thank you for your attention to this case." As the courtroom began to empty, my father approached me directly, ignoring the warnings of his lawyer. His face was a mask of fury and humiliation. "This isn't over, Rebecca," he hissed. "You've embarrassed me for the last time." Mark stepped between us. "Actually, it is over, Mr. Mitchell. The recording has been provided to the district attorney's office for review. They're particularly interested in the references to gambling debts and potential fraud." My father's face went slack with shock. For the first time in my life, I saw him truly afraid. The judge called for order, instructing my father to return to his table. As court adjourned, I remained seated, overwhelmed by the sudden conclusion of the battle that had consumed my life for months. Catherine squeezed my shoulder. "It's over, Rebecca. You won." But as I watched my father shuffling papers with trembling hands, I wondered if anyone had truly won in this sad family drama. The victory felt hollow, tinged with grief for what might have been a father who could have taken pride in my accomplishments, a brother who could have been my ally rather than my saboteur, a family united rather than torn apart by greed and resentment. Then I thought of Lily, growing stronger every day in her hospital crib, and realized that the true victory wasn't in the courtroom. It was in breaking a generational cycle of toxicity and ensuring she would grow up in a home filled with love, support, and truth. The 7 words I said to my father in that courtroom, "I forgive you, but justice requires the truth," weren't planned or rehearsed. They emerged from someplace deep within me as I watched his face transform from smug certainty to shocked disbelief when the recording played. In that moment, I realized I could finally let go of the anger and resentment I'd carried since childhood. Not for his sake, but for my own and for Lily's future. The aftermath of the trial unfolded rapidly. The district attorney's office opened an investigation into my father's financial dealings based on statements from the recording. The IRS dropped their audit of Mitch Connect after reviewing evidence that the discrepancies had been deliberately planted. Our company's stock rebounded as the truth emerged, and clients who had put contracts on hold renewed their commitments with apologies for doubting my integrity. 2 weeks after the trial concluded, my father was charged with multiple counts of fraud, perjury, and evidence tampering. Rather than face trial, he accepted a plea deal that included 18 months in prison, financial restitution, and mandatory counseling for gambling addiction. James avoided criminal charges by cooperating with prosecutors, though his medical license was temporarily suspended pending an ethics investigation. The media narrative shifted dramatically. Business publications that had questioned my self-made status now ran features on resilience and perseverance in the face of family sabotage. The Women in Tech Association invited me to deliver their annual keynote address, focusing on overcoming personal challenges while building a business. Several universities requested I speak to their business students about ethics and integrity in entrepreneurship. Through it all, my priority remained Lily. After 97 days in the hospital, she finally came home, a healthy, alert baby with her father's blue eyes and my determination. Mark took a 6-month paternity leave to care for her while I gradually resumed my role as CEO, though with a more balanced approach to work and family than I'd previously maintained. Mitch Connect continued to thrive, expanding into new markets and developing innovative features. We launched a special initiative focused on helping family businesses implement healthy structures and boundaries, turning my painful experience into a resource for others navigating the complex intersection of business and family. Relationships. The Mitchell Foundation for Young Female Entrepreneurs recovered from the earlier scandal, eventually becoming one of the most respected organizations supporting women in business. We developed a special program for women escaping financial abuse, helping them build economic independence through entrepreneurship, a tribute to what my mother had wanted for me but couldn't achieve herself. 1 year after the trial, I received a letter from the Federal Correctional Facility where my father was serving his sentence. I let it sit unopened on my desk for days, uncertain whether I wanted to read whatever justifications or accusations it might contain. When I finally opened it, I was surprised by its brevity and tone. "Rebecca, I've had a lot of time to think in here. The counseling has helped me see things I couldn't or wouldn't see before. I was wrong. About everything. The gambling wasn't just a habit. It was an addiction that distorted my thinking and my values. I convinced myself I deserved what you built because I couldn't face my own failures. I don't expect forgiveness. I probably don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I recognize the truth now. You built something remarkable entirely on your own, despite my attempts to hold you back and then take credit. Your mother would have been proud. Dad." The letter wasn't a magical reconciliation, but it was something I'd never expected, a genuine acknowledgement of reality rather than a manipulation. After discussing it with Mark, I decided to visit my father in prison, not to re-establish a relationship, but to find the closure I needed to fully move forward. Our meeting was brief and awkward. both of us unsure how to navigate this new territory of painful honesty. He looked older, diminished in his prison uniform, the confident facade completely gone. We spoke of neutral topics, mostly the weather, the prison's education program he'd enrolled in, my vague updates about Lily's growth milestones. As I prepared to leave, he asked the question I'd been expecting. Will I ever meet my granddaughter? I considered my answer carefully. That's not a decision I can make today. When Lily is older, if you've demonstrated consistent change, we can revisit the question. But I won't expose her to the kind of manipulation and emotional abuse I experienced. She deserves better, and I'll protect her from anything less. He nodded slowly, accepting this boundary without argument, perhaps the first time he'd ever done so. You're a better parent than I was, he said quietly as I stood to leave. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was an acknowledgement I could accept. James attempted to contact me several times after the trial, each message containing elaborate apologies and explanations about being manipulated by our father. I never responded. Some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt, and I had no desire to construct another pathway for betrayal into my life. Family, I had learned, was defined by love and trustworthiness, not merely by shared DNA. 2 years after the court case, I was invited to deliver the commencement address at Northwestern's business school, the very program I'd worked so hard to attend years earlier. Standing at the podium looking out at hundreds of eager graduates, I shared the unvarnished truth of my journey, the struggles, the betrayals, the victories, and the hard-won wisdom. Success isn't measured by the size of your company or the digits in your bank account, I told them. True wealth is the freedom to live with integrity, to build something meaningful on your own terms, and to break harmful cycles rather than perpetuating them. Sometimes, the people who should support you the most will instead become your greatest obstacles. When that happens, remember that you always have a choice to let their limitations define you or to use those very challenges as building blocks for a stronger foundation. As I spoke, I spotted Lily in the audience, perched on Mark's lap, clapping her tiny hands whenever the crowd applauded, though she couldn't possibly understand the significance of the moment. Seeing her there happy, secure, loved unconditionally was the truest measure of my success. Later that week, I sat cross-legged on our living room floor, showing 3-year-old Lily how to drop coins into a piggy bank. This is how we save for the things that matter, I explained as she delightedly pushed quarters through the slot. Is it a lot of money, Mommy? She asked, her blue eyes serious as she considered the clinking sounds inside the ceramic pig. It will be someday, I told her. But remember, the most important things can't be kept in a piggy bank. Like what? She demanded, in the direct way of toddlers. Like knowing who you are and standing up for what's right. Like the people who truly love you. Like the strength you find when things get hard. I pulled her into a hug, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. Those are the things that make you truly rich, my love. As Lily grew older, I knew she would eventually have questions about her grandfather and uncle, about the family history that had shaped her mother's path. I would tell her the truth when the time came, not to burden her with old wounds, but to help her understand that we always have the power to choose a different way forward, to transform even painful legacies into sources of strength and wisdom. The fortune my father had demanded in court had never been about money. It had been about power, control, and his inability to accept that I had succeeded without him. In standing up to him, I had claimed something far more valuable than financial wealth, the freedom to write my own story, and to ensure that Lily could write hers. That night, as I tucked Lily into bed, she asked for the story about the brave lady who built a castle all by herself. It was her favorite bedtime tale, a child-friendly version of Mitch Connect's founding that emphasized persistence and courage rather than family betrayal. As I told it, I realized it was no longer just my story. It had become part of Lily's inheritance, not a burden of pain, but a legacy of resilience she could carry forward in her own way, in her own time. And that, I knew, was the greatest wealth of all. Have you ever had to stand up to someone who tried to take credit for your hard work or accomplishments? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life experiences. And remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is speak your truth, even when your voice shakes. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the courage to stand firm in your own worth, no matter what challenges you face.